buenas tardes. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos en otra ocasión, en otro evento más de nuestra extensión del Canvas, nuestras actividades académicas del Festival de la Comunicación. Los saluda Pedro Segura, parte del equipo de programación. Para mí es un honor, estoy muy contento de poder estar aquí presentando y participando en esta Masterclass que reviste y engalana nuestra celebración, que es este año, que en este caso es una conversación que tendremos con dos figuras muy importantes del cine rumano contemporáneo. Nos acompaña la crítica y curadora y también programadora Flavia Dima. Flavia Dima ha participado ya desde hace un par de ocasiones en el festival con nuestra gaceta, que los invitamos a revisarla en nuestra página web. En esta ocasión nos acompaña también con otro texto, pero en fin, en contexto es una crítica programadora de vías en el Festival de Cine Experimental en Rumania, crítica que colabora usualmente en medios como Movie Notebook, Films in Frame en Rumania, y ella estará platicando, conversando con nuestro invitado de este año, que es parte del jurado Nuevo Horizonte. Me refiero a Radu Jude, un cineasta que hemos tenido el placer de presentar 4 de sus trabajos y que en esta ocasión se presenta con 2, con Plastic Semiotic en la competencia más allá del Canvas y con su película ganadora del Oso de Oro en la pasada edición de la Berlinale, Bad Luck Banging or Looney Porn. Sin más preámbulo y para aprovechar nuestro tiempo, le doy la bienvenida a nuestros ambos invitados.
Hello.
Flavia. Hello, Flavia, Radu. Thank you so much for joining us. We're super honored in the name of Black Canvas. Thank you so much for your time and for your disposal to join us today. And we are here thank you too. We are
Why
here
is it called Black Canvas?
That's a good question, but Claudia Sigueruelo, that is the artistic director, is not here. But what I can say in this moment is that Black Canvas is this concept of the screening in cinema, in which, you know, we all feel the voids, and at the same time it's a void, and it's an eternal, like this black hole of the cinema history. I don't know. I'm just trying to.
I thought it's some satanistical.
When you see so many spiders in the logo and things like that, maybe we're doing something that maybe it's not okay, and that will explain a lot of karmas. But let's hope it's not a Rosemary Baby thing. But beyond this, again, thank you so much, Flavia. I'm gonna stay here because let's try to make it like a local thing, because you are like you're part of an industry and you're part of the same universe. The film as well, specifically Bad Luck Banging or Looney Porn, it's like a portrait, of course, of society in a specific and historic time, but as well exposes their Romanianity, I don't know, in with a really particular way of doing so, like to try to not to stay in the local. And I don't know if I'm gonna help, but I'm gonna be here because I want to see you and hear you both. So please, Flavia, thank you so much again, and this is your show.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you very much. Thank you, Radu, for being here. If I know that you're not a very particularly formal person, Radu, but I would like to do a short introduction of your work, if you agree.
Yes, but let's remember that introduction is an obscene word, as Flaubert said.
Introduction is an obscene word. Introduction is an obscene word, but still, I'll try to
let's keep it obscene
approach. Well, okay, obscene. Of course, you could say that it's obscene that the very first award that you won in 2007 was the biggest award that you won at the beginning of your career with your first big short film, The Tube with a Hat, was in Sundance, the winner of the Grand Short Film Award in 2007, which was followed by your first feature film, The Happiest Girl in the World, Cea mai fericită fată din lume, which many local critics consider to be a staple film of the Romanian new cinema. Your following feature film, Everybody in Our Family, is also a film that has had at the time heavily circulated in the festival circuit. And it was an expose of a moment of crisis in a Bucharest middle-class family that is divorced. And starting with your next feature film, Aferim, in 2015, winner of the Silver Bear at the Berlinale, I think that film represents a very interesting point of departure also for your work up to that moment, but also, as many critics, myself included, believe it's also a point of departure for the Romanian new cinema. And a point of departure in which sense? In the sense that it's departing from the, let's say, obsessive means that it had used up to then, realistic mise en scène. Usually you would follow a character only for a couple of days in their lives. There was a plot line that was usually set either in the contemporaneous world, either, not in your case, but in the case of other directors, within the last years of the communist regime. So it was all pretty heavily based in let's say, the present time of the Romanian transition. And with Aferim, you have this change. And the change becomes increasingly apparent, I think, the more you watch the films that you have released in the meantime. So Scarred Hearts in 2016, I Do Not Care If We Enter History as Barbarians 2018, and now I think and also, of course, your explorations in documentary cinema, and I'm going to mention The Exit of the Trains and The Dead Nation. But I think all of it comes to a very interesting culmination when it comes to your career and your interests, really, in Bad Luck Banging or Looney Porn. So I think after this obscene introduction, maybe my first question for you would be, when did you start to ask yourself questions about, let's say, narrative cinema or the traditional structures of narrative cinema, first of all, and to situate yourself within the hegemonic discourse in Romanian cinema at the time, which was the new Romanian cinema with its very clear set of rules, and to move away from them?
Well, of course, a question like that with when or why, it's always difficult to ask, because it's always a bit arbitrary to choose one moment or another. But let's say that I believed for many years a kind of idea, which is not a bad idea in the end, unless it becomes a kind of a mantra or of an obligation. And I see that at the young filmmakers. The idea that says that in order to make a film, it is better, or it is mandatory, for the filmmaker to have a direct connection with the topic or the subject, to be personal, as it is the usual form. Let's make personal films, personal stories, and so on and so forth. This is, of course, a good thing for many reasons, because you know better the stories, you know better the characters. It might sound less fake than it might happen if you don't. But of course, this comes with a certain limitations. And I realized that because after my first short films and the 2 feature films, which all of them were in one way or another related to or inspired either by my own life, my own personal life, let's say. I mean, as a starting point, not necessarily in the form, in the finished films, or by the things that I was a witness to. For instance, The Happiest Girl in the World, it is a film which starts from a situation that I took part in from the outside, in a way. But then, little by little, I got, how should I say, a little bit critical towards these things, because, of course, being interested in yourself and your world is good, as I said, but it's also very narcissistic, and in the end, extremely egotistical and egoistical in a way. And cinema, I think now it exists, and one of the power of cinema, one of the biggest powers, is that you have an instrument, which is the camera, that you can look outside yourself, not toward yourself. You can look outside. You can look at other people, other stories, other worlds, other realities. But of course, not everything was so constructed. It was more on an intuition level. And in the same time, I also always, because I belong to a generation that happened to live something extremely special and apart from other from younger generations, like your generation at least. The fact that we lived through a revolution, even I was 12 years old, but it still was a real thing that happened, and a certain regime which seemed to everybody to be forever changed in one day, and another thing started. And this another thing which was more chaotic and more some things were for better, some things were not good, but all in all it was a huge change, came also with exactly when I became a teenager. And I think it was a very important time to live through this, because all of a sudden you could question things. You could question, for instance, history, and of course, because history was the thing which was the most faked during the communist dictatorship. For my generation, or for people who were a little bit worried, who are we? Where do we come from? The history was an important thing. So there was a lot of books in the 90s related, most of them to the horrors of the communist dictatorship, to political prisoners, and all this. But also there were lesser books, a few books, and other media, I don't know, like some TV documentaries, this kind of stuff regarding older times, like the fascist times of Romania. And I mentioned here a book which is translated in many languages, I think, which is a diary of a writer named Mihail Sebastian, a Jewish writer. And when that book appeared, I was 18 years old, and it was like a big shock to read about all our models already, people from the 30s and 40s being close in one way or another to the fascist regime. So I'm telling all these long things, not because this desire to understand the society and its history was first, of course, not a thing, I'm going to make films about this in the future. I didn't even know what I was going to do. But then with Aferim, I started to not programmatically, just happen one after another, to research back to the things I researched as a citizen, I would say, as a young citizen, when I was in my late teens and the beginning of my 20s, and to say, why not? I can use that in a film, because it's also another thing that nobody's making this film from our generation or from the new wave. But that's another question, and I think it would be too long to explain why. But because, for instance, I made a film like Aferim, which touches the topic of the slavery of the Roma population. And now, looking back to that, I can ask myself, how is it possible that it was not even one single film made about that before that? It's a bit hard to understand. Or the stories about the Holocaust, about the participation of Romania in the Holocaust, all these things. So probably if there would have been 100 films made before, I wouldn't have made the films I've done, but they're not, they don't exist.
No, but that is an interesting point that you raise, because many, as the audience I think can imagine, Radu is a pretty controversial figure back home. So, and there's a lot of people which bring this very, I believe, unjustified critique to your explorations of Romanian history, and particularly of the corners of Romanian history that we refuse to face, which also I think has a particular culmination in Bad Luck Banging, because then there you turn your eye towards the things that we refuse to face nowadays and not in our history, which again is in the line of continuity that I see between Bad Luck Banging and the entirety of your work up to now. How do you respond usually? I mean, of course, not to the imbecile far-right critics which accuse you of being, I don't know, part of the Masonry or whatever. But there were a lot of people who said, okay, what is
Masonry, I
drove
would
you to
go,
do
but
this?
I was not invited. So
You were not invited in the Masonry, so
no,
hey, if you're
I'm amazed because people say, well, if you reach a certain level of being famous, the Masons will reach you, and nobody reached me. So I would go to if
to
they
the
hear.
Masons.
I'm curious. Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about this particularly, about the people who have criticized, let's say, the way of the position, d'où je parle, no? The way the French used to say it in 68. There were some people, like, for example, voices in feminist circles who said, okay, why is this man doing a film about an empowered woman, or arguments like this? And my question is, how would you respond to people like this? Because in the end, I do believe that your films opened up some extremely necessary public discussions. And I myself count myself among the people that found out really about the, let's say, the scope of Roma slavery from your film. That's the moment where I started asking myself some questions. So it's a very delicate situation in a way.
Well, the question is, what do you answer to this? And I will quote again Flaubert, who used to say, "Jamais répondre to the critics, never answer to this." But no, apart from that, of course, I trained myself. It's very interesting because the first time when you make the first short films and you see your name attached to some violent critiques, and it happened to me. I remember very clearly when I've done the Cubita Head and he won the award in Sundance, and all of a sudden the forum of discussions was there on Cinemagia. There was before Facebook and all this, and all of a sudden there was a lot of attacks coming from colleagues, because Cinemagia was a website of filmmakers and film critics, and saying very insulting things. And I felt, because I'm kind of a shy person, I'm not so I'm so strong, let's say. And it was, I said, what have I done? I've made a 20 minutes film, and all of a sudden, because of a film, people are attacking you so wildly. But then you get used to that, and I think it's good, because now I'm so I don't have any let's say psychological reaction to that. I'm completely of course I'm curious sometimes if there's something interesting to read about a film or another, but I don't take anything personal anymore, even if it's insults. If I made and I think you were the only one to write publicly about that, and I mentioned that about some anti-Semites attack of a film critic like Cristi Mărculescu, was not because I was touched by his attacks. I'm not even a Jew, or by his racist or anti-Semite attacks, but that I found a little bit hard to understand why a person like that, or how a festival like Transylvania Film Festival, which is the biggest festival in Romania, accepts to have among its members rabid anti-Semites. But that's something completely else. So I really believe that the film is there like an act of dialogue, and one of the dialogue can be to be criticized. One part, the other part of the dialogue, it can be criticized from all parts, including the fact that people could say, why a man makes a film with a woman, why a white man, non-Jewish, makes film about Jews. I mean, about the involvement of Romania in the Holocaust, or as some Roma people complained about the fact that Aferim is made from a white perspective. But my answer to all that would be that I accept any critique. I don't have any problem with that. But in the same time, I want to make the films because I belong to the same society. And in my opinion, the history of slavery is more history of Romania and the problem of Romania than the problem of Roma. In the same time as the Holocaust, for me, is more the problems of Germany and the problem of Romanians in our case than of Jews. If I would be, I don't know, Jewish, probably I would have made films about Palestinians. I don't know, about the Palestinian problem. And I think that's very important. The only one who told me, I mean, there were some other voices, of course, but one very important was of a sociologist, Roma, named Gelu Duminica, and he organized a screening with Aferim, and he told me that he considered my film very important because it's not made by a Roma person, because it's not made from the position of the victim, let's say, that victimizes from the position of somebody who belongs to the, let's say, to the oppressors, historically speaking. So yes, that's my answer. I think that's important to have this freedom, and this my freedom of making the films, of course, accepts the freedom of others criticizing them any way they want. It's okay. That's one thing. The other thing, I think that's in a way in the films, and I think it's a bit how should I say, not programmatical, but it has something to do with the way I view the things, is that they are a little bit more. There are a lot of contradictions in the films, in a way, and in the body of works that I've done. It's always very funny to see that people who consider that it's okay to make a film about the fascist dictatorship, let's say, consider that it's not okay to make a film which is considered anti-communist, which is like uppercase print, because they say, oh no, we should concentrate on the fascist regimes and let's find the good parts in the communist times, or vice versa. People who consider that it's okay to, and you know that we had public discussions with Mircea Mihăieș and other public intellectuals who said, why don't you make a film about the communist dictatorship? Why do you concentrate on the fascist part? I said, but I made one about communist dictatorship. But for them, this doesn't matter. You just shouldn't touch the fascist part of the fascist themes, so to speak. So I think that the position of the filmmaker is, and I don't know of artists or intellectuals, but that sounds very elitist, and I don't want to sound like that. But I think one of the things is to always criticize. You know, it's to criticize everything in a way, if it's public, if it is a position like that possible.
In this moment, I want, if it's possible, to intervene, because I have a word that was reprised a lot in the last question was criticize, and I'm really curious about your perspective at one point. I'm gonna do a little bit of context for you. Here in Mexico, in the Mexican cinephilia, in the Mexican cinephile, that it's not precisely like a big community, but it's a community. The Romanian New Wave was super important, and it had like a lot of impact in the local industry, even though to the level that even I don't think that there's many connections between Romania and Mexico. Many people start to reprise the aesthetics rules that the women propose. In this case, from the outside, you're gonna tell me that probably I'm wrong, but for me, you're the filmmaker of the transition, the one when the thing is collapsing, you are. It's always like it's like the end of a civilization, and you're proposing new paths. I know that you're a cinephile because, for example, in Bad Luck Banging, in the credits, you thank to the La Loupe. It was this project about sharing and seeing films that make a lot of people to survive pandemic, for example. And I'm curious if you think that the way when you're constructing a film, you're thinking about criticize or reflecting. I know that you are, but I want to know how you think you're criticizing or reflecting on the history of Romanian cinema in general, from Lucian Pintilie, for example, to let's say the Romanian New Wave in the Speak, or as well, if you think that the way that you portrayed the history of Romanian, or in this case, in Bad Luck, the Romanian present, if you're doing a critique, or if you're doing, it's rather trying to understand the world, or if you think that they are the same. That's our like two questions. I don't know if I have a third one, that it's how Radu prepares itself every time that he has to approach to a new topic or two, because all of your films have different optics. You're not for me, it's visible that you're a filmmaker that gets bored super fast. You don't want to reprise what you did in the previous one. You want to try new things because you think that everything requires a new optic. So I don't know. I want to discuss that. Sorry.
No. I think they are interesting questions. I hope I'm able to answer them because what you said, yes, it's true and it's not true, because you say, do you think about this or that? And of course, to make a film means a lot of time and different moments. And in some moments you can say, I think about this and that, but in other moments you don't think about anything. For instance, when I'm shooting the film, I don't think about anything, just a kind of, I try to rely on what is prepared before, and on the gut feeling of the moment, of the intuition of the moment. But of course, before that and after that, you think to a lot of things. If I think of the Romanian film history, that's a bit complicated to say, because we don't have, I believe we don't have a real film history,
Yeah, I would agree, not really. I mean, yes.
Yes, it's hard to feel, you go to somebody in Italy or in France, or I don't know, in other countries, and they would say, it's difficult to start because you feel the burden of the tradition behind you. We never thought about this, because there were 2 or 3 filmmakers everybody loved, and one of them, which is Lucian Pintilie, even let's say that supported us and was on our side all the time. He even participated in the production of one of my films, in Scarred Hearts, and he was always curious about what I have done, and so on and so forth. So but what I said before, it's true that I find a little bit, and it's not a critique, not at all, and I try to understand why. There is, for instance, most of the Romanian films, some very good, some masterpieces, some less good, some bad, it doesn't matter, from the last, let's say, 20, 30 years, the new wave films, so to speak, are all of them in a way films which deal with either contemporary reality or the late communist dictatorship time, and they deal with that in a manner which is, on one hand, it's directed towards only one thing, which would be, only one perspective, which is a perspective which is in the same time, let's say, metaphysical, existential, maybe social in some cases, psychological, but basically psychological and metaphysical, and what is called general human, general uman in Romanian. What is and this metaphysics, this metaphysical direction, which I think it's of course completely legitimate and can give can lead to wonderful films. I feel a little bit, I think it comes from the fact that during Ceausescu's times, the artists were forced or supposed to, deliver also political messages, like the politics of the party and so on and so forth. And when somebody was against that, he would be non-political in a way. When Mircea Daneliuc was making his films, like just a regular, with regular people shooting in the street, that was a kind of a political attitude, and this remained after the revolution. Remained. People say, I don't want to be what is called, even in the most broad sense, a political filmmaker or a historical filmmaker. I'm interested, and people say about me, my colleagues saying, I can understand, maybe their perspective is right, and I don't even care. They say, well, Radu Jude is not a good filmmaker, he's not an artist because he's political or historical, while we are metaphysical, existential, and general human. And on one hand, I can agree with that perspective. On the other hand, I think that it's a little bit more perverse, because it's like people force you. It's like the society, or I don't know, the whole milieu, the critics, the industry, so to speak, the reception of the films. It's like forces you to be in a way, like people say, make a love story and it's fine. Make a film about death and it's fine. Make a film about divorce, it's okay. Make a film about generosity or lack of generosity or moral issues and it's fine. But if you touch topics like racism, like feminism, like LGBT, not in the case of my films, but in the case of other filmmakers, if you touch topics like the Nazi times of Romania, the extreme right wing, all of a sudden, not only you're trashed, but you're not considered good enough artist, so to speak. And it happened, I made last year, I made a short film, very, very short film, like it's not a big deal. Flavia knows it, which is called Dear Intellectuals, which was about a small racist thing happening around. And I gave an answer to that, a cinematic answer. And people were really freaking out. First of all, saying, this is not a film, this is not a filmmaker, what a filmmaker should do, So to finish the answer, yes, if I'm considering myself a part or trying to be a little bit to describe myself in the position, I would say that my position is to be below the filmmakers of the Romanian New Wave, which are metaphysical and existential, and I'm historical and, let's say, in one way or another, political. So I'm less a filmmaker, but I'm okay with this position. I'm at the bottom of I'm on the sand in this wave. I'm at the bottom of the sea. That's one thing. And then,
but that's where the most interesting creatures live, if you ask me.
Like crabs.
Big 8 yeah, but the crabs that are like 8 meters big,
Yeah,
I think it's a good place to be, at the bottom of the sea. Sorry for interrupting like this, but
no. It's maybe I don't know, but it's like, and maybe there's something true in that, because I consider myself that I'm not talented, and I know I am not, and I know that in the same time, if you work a lot and if you rely on the tools that you have, which is the camera and montage, it's okay. You can exist as a filmmaker. Maybe I feel okay to exist in this modest way. And your last question, I think I forgot it now. I'm sorry, Pedro. We don't hear you.
Sorry, I was saying the me too. I forgot it a bit, but it was.
The why they are so different, but it's the same thing. I mean, it's two things. For once, is that I don't have a style, and for years I searched for that. It's like every filmmaker has to. I mean, great filmmakers. If you see a Antonioni film or I don't know, a Hong Sang-soo film or Ozu film. Or an Eisenstein film, you can see their style in 1 minute, and or the themes at least, and of course this is, I don't know, a kind of a dream, probably a dream like thing to happen, to find a way, a very specific way, with a specific perspective, with a specific world. Like David Lynch, he has such a great inner world that just expressing that on a film is enough, and creates brilliant and jaw-dropping films. And I don't have that. But in the same time, I consider the cinema, actually, not only as a tool of expressing yourself or of expressing your opinion or your perspective on the world, but it's also, I would say, a tool of thinking, a tool for thinking. And I think this is obvious because we are somehow tricked by all the all the big studios and all the commercial cinema, television platforms, whatever. I heard that thousands of times from producers, from distributors, from sales agents, from TV people, and so on and so forth. People say, cinema started as a circus attraction in a way, And of course they are right, because they saying they can prove that at the beginning of cinema, in circus tents, they screened films there, so it was for entertainment. But in the same time, I would answer to that they forget that there's another history of cinema that starts with Muybridge or Etienne Jules Marais, where they tried not only to entertain, but they tried cinema to use it as a tool for researching the world, for seeing something in the world, like sometimes small thing. How does a horse runs with the four legs in the air, or 2x2? I don't know. How does a cat fall? How does a dog walks? How a naked woman or a naked man walks? How is the muscles? All these kind of things that cinema was used as a tool to see better, this kind of thing. So in a way, I would say that cinema is not only a tool for entertainment or a tool for personal expression, but also a tool, like a scientific tool, if I can use the word, to see what is around. And from this point of view, I believe that every film has to find, or in my case, for every film, I need to find a form to shape the film in this way, to use this tool of camera and of montage in ways to reflect on the topics, so to speak. And this is why I never, there's whenever I'm making a film on Facebook or sometimes on emails or even phone calls, there are people with good intentions calling me or telling me, why don't you make a film? Somebody called me one year ago and said, why don't you make a film about a strike in a factory? There was a strike or something like that. And I said, well, I'm not saying that the topic is not good, but I don't have a form for that. I don't know how to use the camera or to tell the story of this strike. Maybe others can do it, but I cannot. And it's, people don't understand. They say, wow, you can make a film about everything, but I cannot make a film about everything. I need to find the form. That's crucial. Yeah.
Speaking of form, I think also relating to the scandal surrounding Dear Intellectuals, I think also a really big part in that scandal is played by the fact that people are not accustomed to the directions in which you have went with your cinema, towards the direction of using found footage, towards using montage and images and dialogue in a different way than people expect when they think naturally of the word filmmaker. They think about classical narrative fictional cinema. And I think this also relates into what you were saying about Romanian cinematic heritage, which is only now starting to be explored by researchers such as Andrei Rus and Gabriela Filippi, who are starting to look at the heritage of Romanian cinema from the communist period with a very fresh perspective, and not really insisting so much into turning the main element of the films into the political discourse. And now they're also starting to look at other elements. They're starting to look at the mise en scène. They're starting to look at the montage, at the way that the actors are used, and not only at the classical reading that was applied, for example, I don't know, to Daniel Iuc or to Lucian Pintilie about the subversive political nature of the films. And I think that's also like an important thing that needs to be taken into account. Romania doesn't really have an experimental cinema tradition. There are very, very few of these films that were possible during the communist regime, and they were extremely far away from the center of the discourse, and that's a very clear thing. Many of them were artisanal, homemade by artists such as Înghit Florescu. Only a very small amount of people knew that these films existed. An even smaller amount saw those films. So I think it also boils down a lot to form, really. And that was also part of the question that I was asking. And so not only thematically these departures, but also your interest in representation and the image. Representation is a very big topic. It's a manifest topic in many of your recent films. So really the question is, when did you start asking yourself questions about these hegemonic structures of cinema that we have assimilated and that have turned into expectations, really? I mean, how many authors did you have before 89 that really were questioning representation in the image? You had Tatos, yes, Alexandru Tatos, who For those of you who are watching us who might not know him, he died extremely quickly after the revolution, so he wasn't able to make any films after the revolution. And Mircea Daneliuc, he also was having moments in which he was questioning the medium, but it was nothing as strong as you are doing in regards to the concepts of representation. Yeah, I think it also leads to a lot of misunderstandings really related to your work.
No, the comment is absolutely right, and I think very good, because it's true that not only that we didn't have a tradition in filmmaking, like you say, and even the new researchers trying to find, this unearthing the old films, and I think of course it's very good that it's done, and it's important, and sometimes they find something interesting, but it's such a poor history if we are honest with ourselves. I mean, you really don't find anything. It's like you open the archives and interesting films appear, very, very few, and the hype is, I think, bigger than the films themselves. But well, it's good that it happens. But what you say, I think what is important is the fact that, and this shows in a way, not only that we didn't have as I said, a history of cinema, but we didn't have a history of theory in cinema, or in critical thinking about cinema that would incorporate other types of filmmaking apart from, let's say, straightforward narrative films and straightforward documentary films. And even in my case, it's really, it's hard to explain it, but the power of what psychologists name peer pressure, but it's not only that, the power of the ideas around is so big that you never know how it affects you. I remember when I tried to enter National Film School, and I never was admitted to it. 3 times I tried at the half end of the 90s. And it was always, I mean, if you would talk to people around, everybody literally would tell to you, it's impossible to make films if you don't attend this school. And, already there were examples like Tarantino or like other people in other countries who never went to a film school, and they were making their films, But this somehow didn't matter. The power of the opinions of the others were bigger than the realities that you would express. Like, you cannot make a film unless you have millions of euros and so on and so forth. And yes, it's true that this kind of smaller cinemas or different types of cinema, I'm always asking myself, discovering relative recently the films of Andy Warhol, why these kind of films were not done, not only in the Romanian in the 70s, because that would have been impossible, probably because of the censorship, but nobody made this kind of films in the 90s or in the 2000s. But this had to do with the fact that you didn't know about them. To give maybe a more powerful example is, 2 years ago I was in Bulgaria, a country close to Romania, I think even more poor than Romania, and with even more economic troubles and administrative troubles and corruption problems than Romania. And I met with the filmmakers there. I had the premiere of my film, and it was after that it was a small reception, and in a very dark room. It was very depressing already, and I met like 10 or 15 Bulgarian filmmakers, and all of them were like collectively hypnotized, telling it's hard, it's impossible to make a film in Bulgaria nowadays, it's impossible. I wait 10 years the financing, I waited 7 years, and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, but why doesn't these problems create an energy of protest against that, and an energy of making films with whatever you have? You have mobile phones, you have a video camera, you have some personal archives or some public archives. I don't know, you can make a films out of everything. But I believe that if you don't have a community to support you or to think together with the community, it's very difficult to do it on your own. And I think in our case in Romania, which at least for people my age, I'm not able to find a community like that, although I would love so much to have it, is the internet that is like the surrogate of a community. And all of a sudden you can find, Pedro mentioned La Loupe, the cinephile group, or just other people, and all of a sudden you can find a kind of, you don't need, it's not about the money, it's about the feeling that things can be done differently. And if nobody else around, if there's nobody else around to say yes, they could be done, you get depressed and you don't do it. But if there's people around, you can say, yeah, well, of course I can make a film with a mobile phone. Maybe not a 2 hours film, but a 3 minutes film. Or I can make a film with some photographs, as I did. The film with the photographs I did, The Dead Nation, I started first because I didn't have a financing for a new film, and it took ages to have it. So I said, well, I want to do something. And I had this idea, and I said, maybe it's time now to make this small idea. I don't think it's a great film, but it's still a film that exists. It has an idea, at least. And it has or like years ago, I made another 1 hour film called The Film for Friends, which was made exactly like that in the time where we were waiting for a bigger financing. And somehow I think that's a healthier solution than to wait like the Bulgarian colleagues, to stay and say, well, it's difficult. I waited 10 years. Somebody waited 10 years to finance the film. I think it's something inhuman and in the end a toxic way of thinking. Yeah. Sorry, it took me so long to.
First of all, no, I want to do a parenthesis. I want to thank all the Bulgarian community that is watching us today. No, I'm kidding. No, sorry. No, I'm really curious about the answer. Sorry, my internet failing a bit, so I miss. But I think I only skipped like 2 things, and because I with this idea that it's the thing that you proposed, like I think it comes from an urgency. I don't know, like a continuous flow of creativity that you cannot control, and it has to like leave your physical body and to expand into cinematic graphic form. For me, I saw it on the pandemic with many filmmakers. I guess that this it's like fiction cannot stop, or I don't know, like this love to creation cannot be just controlled. And I don't know if it's fair, but I want to settle down into Bad Luck Banging. That in a moment the pandemic gets present. No, the pandemic, it's a character in a way. It's more than a context. It's something. It's an element that as far as I know, it was not in your original idea, because your original idea was intersected by the pandemic. And then when you're like, let's say, set free to this, you decide not to modify, but just to adapt. So I would love to hear some thoughts about that because you could have said, no, let's wait for everybody to be vaccinated to avoid like the mask on the scene. And at the end, it's like let's use face shields, I don't know, in the production, and to just wait and nobody gets sick, and to wear a lot of masks. And but at the same time, I think it helped you a lot with the discourse that you were trying to dissect or to discover or to.
Yeah,
but that's it.
So first of all, there was no question of vaccination last year yet, and even that you would have to wait 300 years to have the whole Romanian population vaccinated, probably, or 1,000 years. It's only 27% now, so it's the lowest rate apart from Bulgaria again in Romania. Look. As we spoke, I've made before that a few historical films, or films dealing with history, better to put, because historical film means a genre which is not something I'm very fond of. Then the idea was, before pandemic anyway, to make a contemporary film with the eye of somebody who's doing it like a historical film. Which means the fact that if you go to I don't know, some ancient archaeological sites like Pompeii, or I don't know, like the Maya population pyramids in South America. Everybody's paying attention to all the details, the smallest painting, the smallest sculpture, the smallest wall, because it's a remains from that era, and it helps you. It's all that you have to understand that society. Of course, this attitude cannot exist normally towards our contemporary times, because, well, we are used to things. But then if you, I don't know, if you take an iPhone or a Coca-Cola bottle or whatever, a shirt like that, and if you take a look like it's a historical object already, all of a sudden everything becomes again interesting. In a way, everything is interesting if you try to look at it like it happens if you sleep for a longer time, and all of a sudden if you wake up for a few seconds, the reality seems very strange and very powerful because of this strangeness. So in a way, I wanted to explore a little bit this, trying to see all the details like it's new, like it's or like it's very old, like it's Pompeii, or Quetzalcoatl, the snake in the street, something like that. So to see everything as with a fresh eye, in a way. So when the pandemic started, of course, it was just another element to include in the film, nothing more than that. Despite the fact that, of course, producers or financing had problems, and people would say, "Let's wait one more year when everything will be ready." We were so naive back then. We thought that in 1 year it's going to be fine. And so that's one thing. But the other thing is that truly that when we started to make the film, to prepare the film, the cases were going up with every day. They were going up, and as a filmmaker, although I'm not the producer of the films, you feel morally responsible for the well-being of the crew, or I feel like that. I mean, some of the people came for me personally, some, and not only for the money they received, some were there at my invitation. So I felt I cannot invite somebody into a film and treat them like I don't care if you get sick or. So I said that, well, if I'm going to make the film now, I'm going to make it even if I somehow go against the film, but to offer the biggest protection, which is, of course, not a very romantic idea. And probably I'm already old, because when I was young, I admire a lot the stories like Werner Herzog, going in the jungle, and even if people die, it doesn't matter, the film has to be done. Or stories like the Coppola on Apocalypse Now, where Filipino people were dying in explosions. But now I'm, maybe I don't love cinemas that much, because I said that's full of shit, man. I don't want to risk anybody's life for a stupid film, even if it's a Herzog film, and especially my films, which are so modest, it's even that would be ridiculous. So I said, if I do the film, I'm going to offer the maximum protection to everybody. So I moved scenes which were normally inside, like the last part of the film with the parents meeting, a parents-teacher meeting that was supposed to be in a classroom. And I said, no, I'm going to move it outside. I moved other scenes outside. I made the crew as small as possible. We were masked all the time. We tested several times. We didn't have proper lunch breaks in order to we only had some crappy sandwiches to eat in the lunch break. And I said to the actors, and I'm gonna keep you with masks on the face all the time. And that's it. So that's maximum that I can do. More than that, it's impossible to offer. So I'm very happy that even if we had a big number of actors and a big number of people in the crew, and we shot in Bucharest, which was the #1 in the infection numbers, still nobody got sick. And for me, this is even more important than the film itself in the end.
What I wanted to ask about Bad Luck Banging, well, I might have also been overexposed, let's say, to, well, since of course it's the Golden Bear winner, you had to do a very extensive media tour and you gave a lot of interviews also in Romania, but also in the foreign press. But for me, right now, when I was trying to think about what to ask you about tonight, it's a really strong feeling. Well, as you've hinted, Romania is in this really, really bad situation right now with the fourth wave, which right now is worse than any of the waves we've had. The vaccination rate is horrible. And in a way, if I think about the third act of your film, in a way, for me, it's a very foreboding, let's say, piece of art about what we are facing right now as a society. And well, everybody I'm talking to nowadays in Romania is having this very defeatist sensation in a way. And yeah, I wanted to ask you about this, and about also, let's say, related to your historical explanations. You oftentimes deal with historical atrocities. Isn't it difficult for you sometimes to look at these very, very heavy topics, at these very, I mean, for a lot of people, I don't know. I, for example, know of people who don't watch your films because they cannot trust themselves emotionally to withstand your films. And for me, yeah.
Yes, yeah, no. Of course, everybody has his or her own limits, and that's something to respect. And I also have problems. For instance, because I have two children, I really cannot watch, and I don't want to watch films which stage the death of children. And there's a lot of a kind of a genre in itself. Films about families losing children or this kind of things. This I don't watch. I cannot. I don't feel strong enough to watch, and I don't want to watch. I think, anyways, that this is something so huge in the life of any parent that I don't know. Only usually people who don't have kids can make them. It's easier for them to make them. So I understand that there's limits into that. And sure, it is and it is not. I think when you expose yourself to all these stories of atrocities, of historical, I don't know, massacres, and all these images and stories that are part of some of the films I have done, it happens, at least that's my experience, it happens two things. On one hand, you're of course completely horrified and scared that things like that might happen again. In the same time, at least in my case, it also gives a kind of, it's probably a compensation thing, a kind of lust for life bigger than normally, bigger than usual, and a kind of appreciation for the kind of life we get. We Romanians, like everybody, I think, are very keen to complain all the time. But sometimes, if you take a step aside and if you look the things more rationally, you can discover that Romania, it's not in such a bad situation. In the end, it could have been normally much worse. It could have been much worse. So I think it's a kind of a double direction. On one hand, you're horrified, and on the other hand, you start to appreciate and to see things a little bit more lucidly. So I'm never, when I see people saying about nowadays parties that like PSD or like USR, that like the fascist party or something like that, I think it's hugely an exaggeration. Or when you see people comparing vaccination with the Holocaust, it's really unacceptable. So I think it gives a good historical perspective, all of this. So I'm not so pessimistic, to be honest, unfortunately.
But at the same time, I think the characters that you flesh out in the third part, well, not let's not say flesh out. I think what you do there, in my opinion, is very much situated in the tradition of Gianluca Caragiale, who, for international audiences, he is considered to be the most important Romanian playwright in history, and he specialized in satire and caricatures. So I feel that there's very clearly something of Caragiale in the third part. Um, but especially, in this part, I remember you said somewhere that you were also inspired by parent WhatsApp groups. I'm thinking of the characters in the last part, and well, I don't know if anybody who's watching us has children or knows people who have children, but parent WhatsApp groups are apparently the living manifestation of hell, as far as I've understood. And yeah, particularly this, criticizing the most tribalistic impulses in society, criticizing the superstitions, criticizing the fact that people are very mean sometimes, are very nasty to each other. They have the worst impulses possible in regards to each other, no matter the history that's staying behind them. They still decide to act horribly. And is that also a thing that preoccupies you? Maybe this impulse of people to be horrible to each other, really, in various forms, up to the
it's also
most
so it's
horrible ways you can imagine.
two things that you mentioned here. One is the humor type of Caragiale, let's say, and of low humor type, low I don't know how to call it, and the other is let's say the pessimism of the film in a way. And as for the first one, I can only repeat what Picasso said, that the caricature is not realistical but is truthful, and I think that's a good description, and I don't shy away from that, from making a little bit things exaggerated. And of course, there's the Eastern European tradition, not only Romanian tradition in this kind of humor, and not only Romanian or Eastern European. But I strongly believe this idea of Chekhov, that any situation has, if you look at it from a certain angle, with a certain eyes, let's say, is humorous, even if it's a dramatic or sometimes even tragic. It always has a humor dimension into it. People don't like this, but because it undermines the seriousness, and sometimes it's very good to undermine. Sometimes it's not good to undermine the seriousness of facts. Sometimes you need to be serious, and humor can destroy something. But I'm for that. I like to destroy this seriousness. I mean, if you take our situation now, with this live, and I'm here with this awful kitchen things behind, and you have a stove, and Pedro has some, I don't know, some trees, and with his glasses. I mean, we all look like very ridiculous if you look from this angle. I mean, we are in a serious situation, but then, I'm in a kitchen in Romania, Pedro is in Mexico. It really it's one of the most stupid things people can do at this hour, to have a discussion like that. But this is just to see it from a certain angle. But it's an angle that interests me, it's true. Which of course is not accepted by many people, and it's okay, it's no problem. And the other thing that is not accepted, I noticed, is a little bit of what you can call, you described it very dramatically as, all kind of horrors that are around, of attitudes, which in the end can make the films seem pessimist, which they are. From one perspective, they can be considered pessimist. And I think for many people on the progressive side, the pessimism is like a sin, because, if you're pessimist, it's like they lose their job. I mean, of course, when you're pessimists, wow, we have to be optimists and to change things and to be revolutionaries or whatever it is. And if you're not, people can say, well, I don't want to have something to do with this pessimist guy. And it's okay, I don't have a problem. I just don't like optimistical things in art. I think art shouldn't be optimistic, shouldn't be, I mean, not it shouldn't be, it's just my perspective. Everybody can do it in one way or another. But I always, in order to become optimistic, I need a dose of pessimism somehow. It's like a dialectical movement, you know. You need to go to some depths of pessimism in order to come and try to change something. It's like Gilberto Perez or Gilberto Perez, I don't know the pronunciation. In that book, he said, well, art cannot change things, but at least it can show us what is to change. And this, so in the end, I think it's not pessimism, because if the film exists, that's an optimistical act in the end. I think to make a pessimistic film is something optimistical. If you're pessimist, you don't do anything. I strongly believe that. So yeah.
And what I also think is interesting about your recent work is that, in particular regarding to humor, you're also looking at this, you're also starting to use a very, let's say, naughty style of humor, very sexual, particularly, you know, the kind of humor a lot of people really shied away, not just at a global level, really, and a lot of people consider maybe that kind of humor to be passé right now, or even outright politically incorrect in some instances. But I think it's also like a really nice, and it's also visible in the title of Bad Luck Banging, which, well, it's a bit untranslatable if you think about the original version, because it makes a reference to these cabaret style, very B-movie comedies that came out in Romania, where the female characters were heavily sexualized. There was a lot of sexual humor. You had male characters that were constructed based on potency and so on and so forth. And I think it's really interesting how you start exploring within this, not just in Bad Luck Banking, but also in semiotic plastic. And I think my question about the relationship between the two beyond the humor is also, I feel that there's a starting point for plastic semiotic in Bad Luck Banging second act. And I wanted to ask you if this intuition is in any way correct.
Oh yes, absolutely. So for if, people who didn't see, Plastic Semiotic is a short film which is made entirely with toys put in certain mise-en-scènes and sometimes, let's say, sexualized mise-en-scène, or also showing to history, and it's also like a collection. It's like if there exist found footage films, I would call that a found toys film. In a way, like it's a film with juxtaposition of toys, not of images, or juxtaposition of images of toys, if you want. And it's true, they were born in the same time and they were shot in the same time. Actually, it's and it's in a way they come. And not only I made another film called Caricaturana, with some caricatures of Daumier, based on an Eisenstein text, a very short film, and another two films now, two short films which are not finished. One deals with a forgotten history of the real battleship Potemkin, who ended up on the Romanian shores in 1905, not like in Eisenstein film, actually. So we have our footnote in one of the history of cinema in Eisenstein film, and also another one which is with a photo album from the Eastern Front from the 1941. So all these things, it's, if you want, a desire to construct cinema or to make cinema with materials which are not necessarily cinematical, and to make it less like let's say a storytelling device, because of course cinema is a very good tool to create stories, to use it for storytelling. And I just saw recently Întregal, the Radu Muntean's film, and I think it's really full of narration. It's really a story. Every frame tells something from a story, and it's something that I appreciate a lot. I wouldn't do something like that because I'm less and less interested in this storytelling dimension of cinema, and only into this dimension. So I'm interested more, as you said, in representational problems, or in just collecting things. For instance, you discover that, and it's maybe something very lazy or maybe not, you discover that at some point cinema, if it's real cinema, I mean to see it on a big screen, means that if you shoot, for instance, a small toy like that, like that, because I have here the toys right from my kid, if you film something like that and then you project it on a big screen and you change the scale of that small object to something 100 times bigger, that's enough for a film, in my opinion. Of course, people say, well, that's very boring and we don't want to see your film. But for me, this is the essence of cinema. One of the other paths of cinema, essentially, it's because you project it on a big screen, you change the scale of the objects, you put them there for study or for just entertainment, doesn't matter. It's the same thing from this point of view, and that's enough. That's enough. And this is what we did. We shot these toys with macro lenses, so to be able to film something very small like that, and then to make it very big. And for me, this is a pure cinematic drive, so to speak, to see something. The same with the caricatures of Daumier. They are so small, they are like that. In the book I managed to find, and just filming them and then blowing them up on a huge screen, all of a sudden that becomes cinema as well. But well, this is not accepted. People say, well, everybody can do that, so we need a story.
But I find really interesting that you're also playing, there's representations within the presentations. It's like a Baudrillardian matryoshka that you construct in plastic semiotic, I think, in many ways. And there's also a lot of different references, which I also think is really interesting, because the way you create the mise en scène for the toys is that you could either read it as a neutral image of a situation. You can imagine it simply, let's say, if you don't have the references, as kids playing with these objects in certain ways. Mm-hmm. At the same time, you could also read it as, I don't know, The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, or Anna Karenina, The Suicide of Sylvia Plath. I think it was also Full Metal Jacket, the Tiananmen Square scene. There were a lot of them. I tried to make some notes even. So.
Yeah, well, I think Pedro wanted to say something. Can I answer, Pedro, or you?
Go with Flavia first, because I think.
Okay. Now, I think your question should be related to something bigger than that, which is the question of quotations. Basic of all types of quotations, and this is something that is also usually hard to not very much accepted in cinema, not only in cinema, I think, but I think mostly in cinema, because in other, I think in poetry or in literature, it's not that like that. And this is related to how the thinking of people or of certain people like myself go. We live with this mantra, like, be yourself, think for yourself, think with your own mind. But then if I really take this seriously, then I discover that I don't have any ideas. I mean, maybe I have one idea in 1 year, or 2 ideas, or something like that. I don't have my own ideas without influences, let's say. I'm not somebody who can say, I can think without any influence. On the contrary, I think only using the influences that if they are books or media or journalism or films or art or music or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's just I need some food for thought, as they say. I really need that. I cannot do without it. I'm not that intelligent. I'm not that smart. And then I started to use more and more these quotations of any kind in the films to become part of the film. And I think it's okay in the end, because I think that actually the final answer to that was given by Godard, who was asked at some point why is he quoting in one of his films. He was quoting extensively in the dialogue, and he said, look, and people ask him, why didn't you make your own dialogue? And he said, but I didn't make the trees, I didn't make the cars, I didn't make the people who I'm shooting. Why should I make the dialogue? And I think it's true that the job of filmmaker, or the art of filmmaker, if there's one, is to make connections, not to create like that, not necessarily to create like that. If you can create like that, well, that's too better, but otherwise, yeah, why not? I have to plug the computer just a second because the battery is running out.
In the meantime, I'm gonna take this parenthesis to advertise the screening of Bad Luck Banging. They're gonna happen on Wednesday 6 and at Cineteca Nacional at 9 p.m. and at the same time, safe screening room in Cineteca on Sunday the 10th. This wasn't a small advertisement.
Sorry, I didn't hear because I didn't have the headphones.
Don't worry, I made an advertisement announcing the screenings of Bad Luck Banging, so perfect timing, right? Everything. But I wanted to connect this last answer that you made with the previous one that you have. That it was that you don't consider yourself a talented filmmaker. That was paraphrasing you. You were not consider yourself a talented filmmaker. You were like a working class filmmaker in a way, like someone that has to work really hard to. In this way, I'm gonna say I'm gonna do a little praising because you're our guest, and because I truly believe that. I think you're really a talented filmmaker. For example, you just explained how a toy that could be in your kitchen, in the table, because your kid leave it there. You have the capacity to make the connection, to turn it into a discursive, political, historically reflection in a cinematographic form. For me, that should be the talent of the filmmaker, to make something that it's probably not attractive to the simple eye, to turn it into a potential, not a symbol, because I don't want it to be like that or that, but it is, but something that could be aesthetically enjoyed, or at the future to be able to create a discussion. Anyway, for me, that could be a talented filmmaker, because you're able to do connection that it's not so simple to arrive to. In this, you just answered as well that for you, the work of the filmmaker should be able to not create universe, but to make these connections. If you want to answer a bit more about, because my original answer was, my original question was, what is talent in the filmmaking for Radu Jude, and maybe not talking about your films, but in which moments you have seen it in cinema, like, I don't know, like.
Well, of course, it's a tricky question. It's like the question of value. What is value in a film? And of course, it depends on the school of thought that you place into, on the tradition, on the, if you are from a Hollywood perspective, talent and value means something. If you're from a third cinema perspective, there's something else, or maybe it doesn't exist at all, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's I was a little bit superficial saying that, and now you put me you ask me to go a little bit deeper. Well, I would say that for me, talent is in cinema, because is the capacity to use the language of cinema to express ideas or feelings or whatever it is. That's, of course, a very broad and very wide definition of talent. But then it happens that you see it, you just see it happening. If you see, I'm thinking it just because of the age of the persons, because maybe that's where it shows very, very powerfully. If you take a film like the first films of Chantal Akerman, for instance, you can see that there's a kind of talent of expressing things using just this tool, a camera, or if you take, let's say, well, it's of course maybe a too heavy example, because it's already full of different interpretations and connotations. But if you take a film like The Citizen Kane of Wells, for me it is almost impossible to think that it was a film conceived or made by a person who was 25 years old or 26, I don't know, 24, 25. That's a kind of expression of or an Ozu film, or you feel there is a kind of talent that people needed cinema in order to express themselves. Or a Godard film, his association thing, or his mise en scène from his films from the 60s, let's say the first part of his career, or his career is great anyway. You take that and you feel that Godard needed film language to express those things. I'm not sure he could have written them down or made the painting or whatever. I don't know. Maybe he could, but so I think this is, in a very broad way, talent. Now, how you use that or how you go against that, it's questionable, because somebody can come and say, well, this is a very bourgeois definition of the things, and it doesn't matter, we are all equals, and even there's no stupid filmmakers, there's no bad films, it's just let's go against the bourgeois system of values and everything is good. And well, yeah, I can relate to that, and I'm this is a great inspirational thing for me. But in the same time, you just when you put two things together, you just feel it. You feel that. I feel that very, very strongly for the casting sessions. It happens that you speak, let's say, with two actors, and you meet one actor that understands perfectly what you want, that has the same references, sometimes even more. Sometimes, it's perfect. And then when he or she is try to play the part or for the casting, and nothing comes out of that, and then you meet another actor who doesn't understand anything from the script, doesn't have any idea, and when starting to play the part, it's brilliant. It's very strong, and I don't believe that anybody. Well, of course, now it's a strong judgment, and we must relativize it a bit. But when you put them together, then you see there's something like a talent for acting. Of course, they can say, well, there's a different tradition. Maybe the first actor could be very good in another tradition of acting, maybe. But then you see that when you put the two together, it's like I mentioned Herzog film before, and I mentioned once again he made a film about his relationship with Klaus Kinski. If you remember, I think it's called
My Best Fiend. I think
my Liebster Fiend.
My Liebster Feind. Yeah.
Feind in German, yeah. And in that moment, he says that I don't know for which film. Probably, I think for Wojciech, but I'm not sure, or for Fitzcarraldo, I don't know. He wanted to take Mick Jagger to play the part, and you can see in the film the casting take of Mick Jagger, which is, I don't know, we can call it okay or less good, or it doesn't matter. You can say whatever you want, and then he had a casting take with Klaus Kinski, and all of a sudden it was impossible to choose Mick Jagger to play the part instead of Klaus Kinski. I mean, it was a question of talent there, a natural gift to impersonate this kind of thing, to express with your body, to use your body movement, expression, gestures, voice, to create something. And that is more powerful in others than in other people. That's it. Bourgeois or not, bourgeois value or not, it's still,
That, in a way, I think it relates as well with another previous answer in which you said that you can do well, I'm going to paraphrase it wrong, but in a way, you can do a film of everything. But in this case, you do it only when you have a formal reason or a formal approach to react to, no? Like when the formalist, in this case, it's maybe you could do a film about, I don't know, I'm thinking something, a chalkboard. I don't know. It's the first thing I saw. I just did that about tablecloth. I don't know. And maybe it's gonna be bad because in that moment you don't have like this formal approach or this thing or a specific. Well, so in that moment, talent is subjective as well. No, I'm starting to deep praising you. I'm sorry because you're the guest and you should be like
No.
raising the pedestal. But the point is that the talent relies as well on the in how you relate to this world. No, probably Klaus Kinski will not be able to play. You can't always get what you want, but but Mick Jagger's do it really, really
Thank
well.
God. Thank God he didn't try to.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
will pay to see that, to be honest.
Yeah.
But
No, it's true. No, it was just a way because you asked me what talent means, and of course it's a questionable, a very questionable value or idea. But I try to express and to say something about it. And in this way, I don't consider myself talented. But this is not something that we should go on because it doesn't have any value in the end. But yeah, what you said at the beginning of this intervention, that you can make a film with everything. I think we are in a moment where people can make, if there's enough creativity and there's enough drive and enough work and enough real thinking. I'm not that years ago I used to be very, very afraid by the fact that something can happen and you cannot make a film anymore. You don't find the money. And of course, for certain types of films, or for also paying your collaborators, paying everybody a decent fee and making the film or experimenting with some tools, you need some money, and I prefer to have this money. But if not, I'm sure I could manage to make a film with a mobile phone or something like that. I wouldn't stop because I would say, and I'm very amazed. There's if you take the Romanian film industry, probably in the last 30 years, I don't know, with all the private universities and state university and so on and so forth, I think there's more than 300 filmmakers with a diploma of filmmaking, and I think it's only 10% of them are making films. And sometimes you meet people from older generations and they will say, well, I didn't make a film in the last 5 or 6 or 10 years because I didn't receive a financing, which is true, and maybe they deserve to receive a financing. I don't know, but in the same time, I feel there's, as I said before, it happens that in a rich society, in the United States of America, somebody like Ted Fend can make an independent film with almost nothing and do it on film stock and so on and so forth. Or some that movement, which of course some of the films were good, some of the films were less good. The mumblecore movement in a rich society like America created some works, created some films. Why don't we have a mumblecore movement, so to speak? Or why doesn't Bulgaria have it? Why even these underground movements, which they should appear in a poor societies, they still appear in the rich societies? That's something that I don't have an answer to, apart from what we spoke before, the fact that the collective depression, the collective feeling of uselessness make you say, well, in the end, you cannot do anything. And the lack of community. We don't have a community. And I think this is the atomization of our community. We are not together, we never were as a group of filmmakers. Maybe the young ones are I don't know about I don't know that many, but I didn't see that. I didn't see, when you read the interviews with mumblecore filmmakers or with some New York documentary filmmakers, some has a video camera that borrows it to another person, that lends a microphone to another. It's a kind of collaboration. Somebody acts in the film of another one, if there's fiction films. So it's always a kind of effervescence, which doesn't exist here. Here it's like everything is dead, Sometimes a festival happens like Transylvania or I don't know, one world festival, and there's a bit of a hype sometimes for wrong reasons, because people want to go to a party or I don't know, but there's no hype. I would like to and I'm not able to. I'm not, maybe because I'm not a popular person, but I'm not a likable person, but I would like to have a community, to meet for 1 hour every evening with 20 filmmakers and discuss our problems, and then maybe help each other and make the films together, or helping each other, or playing for each other, or I don't know, whatever. All these things, this doesn't happen. It doesn't happen here, but it happens sometimes in a richer society. I don't know why.
I think I have an answer for this. I mean, looking at the filmmakers who are closer to me in age, let's say my generation, if I can call it that way, they do all of these things, but I think people regard it as a very student way of filmmaking, and I think that there's this very preconceived notion that when you have to move on to your feature film, it has to be a very serious thing. You have to work with actors, you have to do this entire process, to be very ambitious, etc., etc. And I think, yeah, it also has to do with the fact that we are thinking about cinema in some very rigid categories, and also young people, a lot of them are setting themselves up for bad expectations when they're making their first feature films. While at the same time, many of the ways of making cinema, they apply it in their student short films, or they apply it in the first short film they make after they finish college. Or let's say people in the documentary cinema community, which oftentimes it's a bit distinctive, let's say, from the big cinema community in Romania, they accept things like that in their films, but they also are very marginal from the discourse. And also it's the same thing when the discourse looks at student films. If you look at the student films that make it to the big national competitions in Romania, they're the films that look the most like a feature film. They're the most polished ones, they're the most controlled ones usually. So I think
probably there's an
relates to
explanation,
that.
because you're rejected by because I think these things happened once, but of course I don't think it has any meaning for a foreign audience, because in the 90s there was something like, which was called Fundația Arte Vizuale, the Visual Arts Foundation, and if you go to their archives, you find a lot of films made with almost nothing, but people coming together to the owner of this foundation, Vivi Dragan, who's a very important director of photography in Romania. So yeah, maybe the young people, of course, it happens during the student time. I'm speaking about what happens after that. Let's see. I hope they will be, and I will join them gladly if they will let me be part of the group.
They seem a bit more relaxed, and well, also, just as Pedro said about, well, modesty and honesty, I think you're also a very big figure for young filmmakers nowadays. I mean,
yes.
I see it programming short films, and there's an increasing amount of films which I think in one way or another they're indebted to the roads that you've opened in cinema. Not just thematically, but also, a lot formally. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that certain types, like let's say, for example, using found footage techniques, I don't know if they are attracted to these styles of filmmaking nowadays because it was a type of filmmaking that was very accessible during the pandemic, to say the truth.
Yeah.
But also, I think they wouldn't have done it just because. I don't think they would have done this montage anyway, and I don't know, put a song from their favorite band on the background and uploaded it to YouTube as a fan video, or I don't know, something like that. I think that you are starting to have an influence on the younger generations of filmmakers. If I'm allowed to.
I hope they will find better models, of course. But
and I think also a thing that you inspire is also you are interested in filmmakers that are very different. You have a very different discourse about cinema compared to other directors in Romania, who most of the time, many of them just give out the same 5-6 names and don't go beyond it. You always have a very eclectic way of, for example, whenever you were an invited curator, you showed something that was completely different, which maybe for an audience in Mexico is much more, let's say, common encounter, but again, for Romania, we're still years behind.
Let's see. Let's hope that, because I strongly believe that if there's a community, if there's a solidarity, they also can impose changes in the industry or in the financing system, and everything else. If not, it will end up like us, being a few pessimistic and sad wankers, separated. No.
Yeah. So I think our time is up. If I am not mistaken, I think Pedro's connection has fallen, but I think this was it. Oh, here he
I'm
is.
back. No, sorry, I have to solve an
Yeah, we
issue.
we were wrapping up, I think.
Okay,
I think this
perfect.
has been it.
What was the
Thank you very
conclusion?
much,
Okay, no.
Radu. Thank you very much,
Thank
Pedro,
you
for
the
having us
invitation.
and staying for at such a late hour. It's almost midnight in Romania. And,
I'm
well,
really sorry about that situation, but I'm really thankful as well of being able to share this conversation with you and discuss so many aspects from the local and the film and visions from you too.
Yeah, I
So,
think we were too local, maybe, but well.
no, it's perfect.
it's part of the trap. But I think, well, I don't know. I also enjoy a lot listening to filmmakers from different spaces discuss their particular problems. So
Yeah, me
I
too.
can only hope. I can only hope we offered the same degree of interest to the international audience.
So come to visit Romania, to say to everybody. After this, I
Yeah,
think it's
but come in a
looks
couple
like
of months. Don't come soon. Come a little bit later.
Coming in the summer.
In the summer, yes, in the summer.
2023, probably.
Yeah.
The best when the vaccination.
33.
33. No, but thank you so much again in the name of Black Canvas. We're super proud and happy to have you here. And
Thank you.
again, Bad Luck Banging screens on Wednesday and on Sunday. Plastic Semiotic passed yesterday. So there's another screening that I don't remember today, but still look at our program. There are so many films as well. You can see in our Gazette a text by Flavia Dima regarding Bad Luck Banging. So I think it's a good complement to this long but enjoyable conversation. So again, thank you so much, and keep joining us in the rest of activities of this 5th edition of Black Canvas. Have a
Good
good
luck
night.
with the festival.
Thank you so much, Radu. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.